What's cracking, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. New video. Before I get into the video, I just want to say that this is my second channel. This is a new channel, and I think the channel's been up a month and a half, maybe 2 months, right? No, hasn't been 2 months yet. We're already over 6,000 subscribers. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate you. Um, Today we're doing a reaction on a Joe Rogan episode, and it's called "China Has 10 Years Left," says geopolitical analyst Peter Zion. Okay, I don't know what this is about. Haven't seen it. I don't like to see the videos I react to. I like to have a genuine reaction. Um, I do like to do Joe Rogan stuff. He's one of my favorite podcasters. Um, this video was recommended by a subscriber. I keep asking you guys, send me ideas, send me videos, send me the names of videos that you want me to react to, and also if it's a long video, send me the timestamp when you want me to start it. I can't always react to the videos that you send, so that's why I ask you guys all the time, send more videos, send stuff that you want me to see, because a lot of it is copyright protected. I don't know that until after I try to upload it. So that said, let's find out what this video is about.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
The rich world was a population column from 1945 to 1992. And with the end of the Cold War, the developing world became a column in 1992 until now. The problem is that this is all temporary because birth rate keeps dropping, people keep living older, and your column eventually inverts into an open pyramid, upside down. And now you no longer have children, you no longer have a replacement generation at all. And there aren't enough people in their 20s and 30s to buy everything. And there aren't enough people in their 40s and 50s to pay for the retirees. So this decade was always going to be the decade that most of the advanced world moves into mass retirement and the economic model collapses. And next decade was always going to be the decade that happened to the developing world. And we found out recently that the Chinese have jumped the ship, and this is their last decade too. So all of the globalized connections and consumptions that create the world we know, we are at the end of it. And we have to go back to a world where trade is more focused on the countries that have a better demographic and security infrastructure, because the Americans are no longer patrolling the global oceans anymore.
Wow, this is interesting. And I'm gonna say, the first thing that popped into my mind when I heard about this, when I heard him say what he just said, um, when he's talking about there aren't enough people having babies and how that shrinks the workforce. I'm interested to see where he's going to go with this, because if we think about it, there has been a push, a hard push over the last 10 years or so, um, by the LGBTQ, I think that's all of it, right? By their community, and getting into the school systems now and teaching about trans and all that. And that lifestyle, you cannot procreate in that lifestyle. If, I'm not going to get into it, but that's just another thing to add into it. Is it's just weird. Like it's true. If people aren't having babies, um, I never even thought about that. What it does to us in the future, not having a workforce, not having people in the workforce to put money into Social Security and all that. That's deep.
So we're losing the security ramifications of an open system. At the same time, we're losing the demographic capacity to support it in the first place. And that's all going down right now.
So when you're saying that China has 10 years to go,
At most.
what do you mean by that?
Well, we now know that they've lied about their population statistics, and they overcounted their population by over 100 million people, all of whom would have been born since the one-child policy was adopted. So this is one of those
Mm.
places where they've got more people in their 60s and their 50s and their 40s and their 30s and their
Now,
20s.
what was the logic behind the one child? Was it that they were overpopulating?
Mao was concerned that as the country was modernizing, the birth rate wasn't dropping fast enough and that the young generation was literally going to eat the country alive. So they went through a breakneck urbanization program which destroyed the birth rate. At the same time, they penalized anyone who wanted to have kids. And both of those at the same time have generated the demographic collapse we're in now.
And the problem with that also was that they wanted male children.
Yeah, there's a cultural aspect to that too. And obviously, men can't have kids on their own.
Which goes to back to what I was just saying was the first thing that popped into my head. Within the gay community, when it's women with women and men with men, you're not. I mean, of course, it's possible, and there are gay couples who have children, but it's not a population that produces as many children for obvious reasons. This is interesting. I don't know how many of you guys are going to be interested by this. Hopefully, a lot. I didn't see how many views this video got, but this is very interesting to me.
And what is the ratio to men to women in the younger people in China now?
Before the data revision, with the last set of lies, it was about 1 to 1.2. It was the most distorted in the world, even more than Sri Lanka, where there had been a civil war for 30 years. Since then, we don't have good sex-by-sex data, but it's undoubtedly worse.
And so what are the other problems that they're encountering that leads you to believe that they only have 10 years left?
Well, without young people, we've seen their labor costs increase by a factor of 14 since the year 2000. So Mexican labor is now 1/3 the cost of Chinese labor. Their educational system focuses on memorization over skills. So despite $1 trillion of investment in a bottomless supply of intellectual property theft, they really haven't advanced technologically in the last 15 years. Mexican labor is probably about twice as skilled as Chinese labor now, even though it's 1/3 the cost. They've consolidated into an ethnic-based, paranoid, nationalistic cult of personality.
That's extremely dangerous. That when he said that right now made me think of Hitler and Nazi Germany. Wow. You know, we're in a different time with different type of weaponry and militaries around the world, but does this mean China would have to engage another country and basically create a workforce through force? Huh.
And it's very difficult for the Xi administration to even run it because it's not an administration anymore. No one wants to bring Xi information on anything. So, Putin lied to his face, for example, but last February about the war, saying, why would I invade Ukraine? And you can see in some of the presses, the defense guys in the back of the room, they didn't want to say anything because Xi has a history of shooting people he doesn't like. And so the Chinese were the only country that was caught with their pants down when this all went down. The Biden administration is basically taking the trade policy of Donald Trump and running it through a grammar checker and putting it into institutions. So we now have tech barricades that prevent the Chinese from buying the equipment, the tools, or the software that's necessary to make semiconductors. In fact, he went so far as to say any Americans working in the sector have to either quit or give up their American citizenship. Every single one of them either quit or was transferred abroad within 24 hours. So the tech system is stalled. They don't have the young people to go consumption-led. They're completely dependent on the U.S. Navy to access international trade. They are the most vulnerable country in the world right now. And based on how things go with Russia, we're looking at a significant amount of raw materials falling off the map, specifically food and energy. And the Chinese are the world's largest importer of both of those things. So there's no version.
That's interesting, man. You know, I was in prison the majority of my life. You guys already know that. And what prison is, it is earth within the walls. And what I mean by that is you have your political parties, which are the various criminal organizations behind the walls. And they each govern their nations a certain way. And so you learn how politics work out here by seeing how they work in there. And so when I'm hearing about what's going on with China, so if this guy knows, then you know for sure there are people in the American government and other governments who hold on a second, who are not friendly to China that are aware of this and will do what they can to make this happen. But yet those countries are going through the same. I don't know. This is deep, man. Thank you to the subscriber that had me react to this video. Again, I don't see a lot of you guys um, clicking on this one, and I get it, but this is very interesting to me.
Of this, where China comes through looking good. And the challenge for the rest of us is to figure out how do we, in as smooth and quick as a process as possible, figure out how we can get along without them. Because they are going away. And they're going away this decade for certain.
Well, if you say they're going away, clearly they're not just going to lay down. They're
No, they'll
going to
die.
try to adjust.
Yeah, they'll die.
Right? They're but how so? Do you think this is because, like, what is, other than, well, here would be a big problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taiwan. Like, if we impose the kind of sanctions that we've imposed on Russia, if China decides to invade Taiwan and the world stands up and the world imposes sanctions on China, how does that go?
This is what I was just saying, right? Does China attack someone else to create a slave labor force to help them? And if they do, it sounds like with China being so huge, so populated, even that would only be a band-aid. This is a problem that apparently they can't fix. And I get what they're saying, what he's saying about how it's going to impact the rest of the world, because when he said China is the biggest importer of food and all these things, so the food that we need to export, if we lose the number one importer, that devastates our economy. Wow, this is almost like, it reminds me of, when um like the lost cities of the Maya, like what collapsed, what was it, and it was different things, but it that's what it reminds me of right now when he said no, the country is going to die. Obviously there will be people there, but it's scary because as they deteriorate as a nation, they still have nuclear weapons, they still have a lot of dangerous things, and who gets those and how do they, I don't know. This is steep.
Very ugly for the Chinese. So, say what you will about the Russian economy. It's corrupt, it's inefficient, it's not very high value add, but it's a massive producer and exporter of food and energy. You put the sanctions that are on the Russians on Beijing, and you get a deindustrialization collapse and a famine that kills 500 million people in under a year. And the Chinese know this. They can only push so hard. Also, you can make the argument that if
This thing, I'm stopping. You guys notice I'm stopping more than I stop on a lot of videos because there's so much being said. There's so much stuff that's thought provoking, right? To me, at least. Where immediately when he said sanctions, if there are sanctions placed on China, that there could have a famine where 500 million people would die. A scary thought is the population that would be impacted the most is the population China needs to get rid of, which would be the elderly. And then they would be left with the younger generation, and you would think that that would be a way where they could come back. I don't know. I'm just thinking, like, I know that's like an evil way to think, but I'm just thinking, like, I'm sure people in China are trying to figure out, like, if we do go into a famine, maybe it helps.
If the Russians succeed, they actually solve or at least address some of their problems. Even if the Chinese were able to capture Taiwan without firing a shot, it doesn't solve anything for them. They're still food importers, they're still dependent on the United States, they're still energy importers, and even if they take every single one of those semiconductor fab facilities intact, they don't know how to operate them because they can't operate their own. And their own are among the worst in the world, not the best.
I don't agree with that. If the semiconductors, I don't know what he's talking about. But if they were able to get, like he said, take over Taiwan without firing a shot, obviously there are Taiwanese people who know how to work those things that would keep them running. And not only that, China would bring them back into the mainland of China and to show them how to do right. Am I missing something here?
Whew.
Now, the only reason, in my opinion, to be concerned about a Taiwan war is because Xi has so isolated himself that when one person is making all the decisions and that one person refuses to access information to make the decisions, strange stuff happens.
And when you say refuses to access, what do you mean by that?
He does not have normal information flows anymore. Like even at the height of the Trump administration, when Trump was basically isolating himself from the entire intelligence community, he was still getting the daily briefing. There was still information being put in front of him. But Xi is so isolated himself. He doesn't want to hear anything except for what he wants to hear.
Okay, I'm starting to get a better picture of what his political leanings are by the way he's talking. And so I don't close down. I don't become closed minded. But now I'm trying to figure out that does this man have an agenda in this interview? Because, like I said, there's just things that he's saying that I could kind of see China being. I don't know. I don't know.
And since no one knows what the status of the conversation with the voices in his head in on any given day, no one wants to bring him anything unless they're ordered to.
How do we know this about him?
Because there's no one to listen to anymore. That's one of the fun things about Russia versus China right now is that the Russian information security is so poor that America.
That was a great question by Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, I think, is probably thinking like me, like, where are you getting this from, and how are you so sure of it, and how is it such a disaster theory that you're speaking of? That I don't know. I haven't heard of this, so I don't know if there's other people, ringing this bell or blowing this whistle, whatever you want to say. I just, something this big, how come it's not more well known?
American intelligence is literally listening in on everything. But in China, we can hear into the office, but there are no conversations happening.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean? Like, so no one talks to him about anything?
Anything. If you look at
So he's just terrifying to people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he murders dissidents. He murders anybody that...
He doesn't murder everyone, but
murders
there's a lot of people in prison.
And there's also a lot of billionaires that got disappeared,
Yep.
right? And any dissent.
Yeah, you're either executed or exiled, intimidated into silence. There's a variety of options.
Throughout history, for the most part, when you've had leaders like that, like with Hitler, there were people around him that were, I believe, willing to get rid of him. Um, there were attempts made. I think I remember reading about a guy put a briefcase bomb, and it was one of his own. I think it was an SS dude. I can't. Don't quote me. Look it up. But usually throughout history, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, there have been people that are willing to sacrifice themselves for the betterment of their country and for their family. So how does this dude have everybody around him? Like, I just don't believe that there isn't at least one person around him that if things went too far sideways, that person wouldn't act. Um, it's very interesting, but like I said, once I figured this guy's political leanings out, uh, I'm just curious of the angle. I'm always looking at people's angles. When you have a conversation with somebody, you know, um, he sat down with this to do this interview for a reason and with an agenda. Let's figure out what is the true agenda. We may not. I may be completely wrong. I don't know.
And if you look at the third party Congress that we had late last year, that's when they select the Politburo. Everyone on the Politburo now is a personal flunky. There is no one from a different faction. There is no one that has a history of being incompetent.
Whew. And what is their plan?
The Chinese?
Yeah, do we have any idea of what their plan to get out of this is?
Nationalism. If you know that the economic situation is going to go to pot, then you have a couple of options. Option one is you try to cut a deal with a country that can help you out, but the only country that could do that is the United States. And the sort of strategic surrender that the Americans would require is not something that the Chinese would accept. So think about Germany in 1946. That's the scale of support.
I brought up Nazi Germany earlier in the beginning, right? That's what this reminds me of. When you talk about nationalism, I will always think of Nazi Germany and what Hitler was able to do to motivate people.
And control that the Americans would insist upon for giving the Chinese a lease on life. But if you go with nationalism, give people a non-economic reason to support the state. So even if you lose your job, even if you can't feed your family, I'm Chinese, I'm Han, that's enough. That has been the strategy for the last couple of years. Will it be enough to preserve the CCP? Too soon to know.
And they're also they're in the middle of the worst aspect of the pandemic for them ever.
Yeah. Now,
which is very strange for us because we're on the other end of it,
Yep.
right? So what happened over there?
Let me start by saying I think it's safe to say that no country has really figured out how to handle this well.
Right.
Second, I will say there are 7 different variants circulating in Beijing right now, or in China right now. 3 of them did not exist 2 or 3 months ago. And it takes about 6 months of data for you to get good information on the R0 and the lethality. So we just don't know. And then third, in part because of Xi, when you're a one-man state, all policy and all authority starts and stops with you. And unless you're providing very clear guidance on everything, which is impossible for one person to do for a whole country, especially one the size of China, the bureaucracy either goes into automatic or does nothing.
This is something, I don't get into the prison politics. But it's a trip to me how, even in prison, there used to be a system in place when all the members of the various organizations were in the shoe, not allowed to be on the main line. They had their surrogates, we'll call them, in place in every prison. Okay, and it used to be a system where they would give one person authority over their faction, and exactly what he's talking about at times would occur. You would get a tyrant. You would get someone who would place nothing but yes men around him in order to wield his power and his authority. And a lot of times there would be coups where that one person would be taken down and another person would be put in his place. But what I want to say is that system changed to where it's no longer one person. I won't go into the details of anything other than that, but I just brought that up to say this. Even criminals, cold-blooded killers, figured out you never let one man rule. It won't work because man is flawed. Men are flawed. Greed, the thirst, the taste of power becomes insatiable to some men. So why can't countries figure that out? Why is it that criminals and killers can figure it out and apply it to streamline what they do, and yet countries this big generating the amounts of money that they could, why can't they figure it out?
Well, right now it's doing nothing. So the data decisions in China are not to gather data and figure out what we can do. It's to, instead of gathering data and lying about it, we're just not going to gather any data at all. So we're not going to know how bad these strains are until they get out of China and circulate in the rest of the world for 6 months. So the lowest fatality estimate that I have seen that I consider credible is that they're going to lose 1.5 million people.
Just from COVID.
Just from COVID. That assumes no broader breakdown in the health system, which we are already seeing.
And is this because they don't have natural immunity because
That's
of
part of it.
the rigid lockdowns that they encountered?
Yeah, from a plus point of view, they did keep the virus out of the population for almost 3 years. So no one has natural immunity. But we also know that their domestically generated vaccines aren't great. And most of the countries that used them in order to get their kind of first batch then moved on to a Western model that worked better.
So they had a twofold problem. They did not have vaccines, and they didn't develop natural immunity.
And now everyone's getting hit all at once with a virus that has at least 50% more communicability than the measles.
Again, I don't see how this guy, I mean, I don't know nothing, right? I'm just speaking. I'm airing my opinions. But when he talks about China has 10 years left because for a big part is their elderly population, people's in their 70s and 60s and 50s and 40s even, right? Those would be the people more susceptible to the viruses and these different strains he's talking about. And when he's talking about losing 1.5 million people to it, that would be a reduction in that population that they're concerned about. Right? I don't know. But I will say this. I don't want to go any further into this video because I don't want to get a strike from YouTube, because once they start talking about the virus, you notice I don't even want to say the name of it, but he has. Once you start doing that and you start talking about certain things, they can give you a strike for giving medical advice. I'm not giving any medical advice. I'm not a doctor, none of that, obviously. I'm just reacting to a video that is on YouTube right now. Like I said, I don't want to go any deeper into it because I don't know what else he's going to say. Anyone interested in watching it yourself, it's a Joe Rogan episode. It's called China Has 10 Years Left. If you just type in Joe Rogan, China 10 years, and it'll pop right up for you. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully I don't get a strike because that would destroy a lot of stuff for me that I'm counting on. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up, give me a like, share the video with someone you think would find it interesting. If you didn't like it, give me a thumbs down. Let me know what you didn't like. If you have any videos you would like me to react to, again, send me the name of them. And if it's a long one, timestamp it. So that way I know where to go, because, sometimes it's a 2-hour long video and I don't have the time to just, okay, what part am I going to talk about? And I can't just react from start. Anyways, you guys stay safe, stay smart, and tell the ones you love that you love them, right? I'm out.